either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And welcome to 2025. It's going to be a cool year full of noids obsessed with their tunes and waifus, or doodles, I think is what this movie calls them.
Yep. Oh boy.
If you haven't guessed it, for our animated kickoff to the year, we are doing 1992's Cool World.
Oh, are we ever?
Yeah, it's one that I've known about this movie for a long time.
The fact you hadn't seen it did blow my mind a little.
Yeah, I don't know why I never got around to it. I think probably it's the price point of the DVD. It's not expensive, but it's still like
this is one that has fully reached cult classic status, and it's by a director who I had assumed you were like well integrated into his works because they fit into your humor.
Nope.
And so I thought you had seen this, and while I would say this is maybe the most popular one of his works, it's not his best, and I think that's why we should start with it for you.
Yes. So, Cool World was written by Michael Garris and Mark Vicker.
Kind of.
Yeah. Directed by Ralph Bakshi.
Oh, yeah.
Cool World is about a man who gets transported to a world full of doodles and attempts to prevent one horny doodle from screwing an artist who keeps crossing over.
And some of you will say, isn't this that movie that is a blend between live action and animation? And I'd say yes. And then you'd think to yourself, isn't that just a ripoff of Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, yes it is.
Yeah.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
It was wildly successful when it came out.
Which I think this year was the first time I saw it too. So,
which I mean, kind of reasonable because that one's audience and like humor does not align with you as much. I think so. Like I wasn't too shocked there. Its success paved the way for a bunch of other live action plus animation. Granted, doing the whole movie that combo style was expensive, and so these are kind of the two that everyone points at as like the best examples at the time.
Most of our examples, if you don't include Bakshi's earlier Lord of the Rings, that's almost
almost
live action.
Oh man, I have the not cleaned up version, and boy, playing the game When Did They Forget to Just Erase the Background that they traced is really fun.
Yeah. So, Cool World stars Brad Pitt as Frank Harris.
A young Brad Pitt, so...
Yes, I'll get into him in just a little bit.
Yep.
Kim Basinger as Hollywood.
Who was almost going to be replaced with Drew Barrymore.
I could see it.
So could the director. Drew Barrymore said no thank you.
Don't blame her. And Gabriel Brin as Jack Deebs.
A solid pick, honestly.
Yeah. And part of the reason we went with this one is because Bakshi is the pioneer in adult animation.
Very much so.
At least in the U.S. with his adaptation of Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, Coonskin, Wizards, Fire and Ice, which saw for the first time this year, and as we previously mentioned, the 1978 Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, which is arguably the only one of those that isn't for adults. It's a little bit more child-friendly.
And it's his outlier because most of his movies deal with a lot of heavy social issues in a very satirical way.
Definitely, and he also has a very dark outlook to his art, which for most of his movies translates pretty directly and is very obvious. Fritz the Cat, I think, being maybe the best example because he had a lot of like direct ties with what his art inspiration was. And
source material because it was a comic strip.
Exactly. Cool World was going to be more dark, which fits in line with more of his writing style and animations that we've seen. But there was a lot of reasons that got toned back. Yeah, and
I'll get into that in just a little bit as well, too.
Definitely.
So I do want to do a little bit on Ralph Bakshi. Just quick, brief history to get up to where we're at.
Yes.
And today's sources include the Wild Mind featurette, as well as a little bit from Unfiltered, the complete Ralph Bakshi by John M. Gibson, which if you want to know everything about Bakshi, that's the
way
one
to
go. Do.
Definitely.
Bakshi is a pioneer in adult animation, like we said. We've been making adult animated movies since the 20s with 1929's Every Ready, Harton in Buried Treasure being the first adult and pornographic cartoon that we know of.
Yep.
Which, if you watch that, it's free on Wikipedia if you want to see a man use his third leg as a third leg and also have it be stolen by crabs.
It's artistic, one might say.
No, it's not. But Bakshi started into animation just after high school, starting work with Terry Toons, initially polishing animation cells, and then went to painting cells, with his first IMDb credit being The Heckle and Jekyll Show, as well as he worked on Mighty Mouse, shows I know of, but I haven't seen myself.
Mighty Mouse, if you know it, that's, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it, because Mighty Mouse's styling leaks into a bunch of other Bakski's works, and definitely is in Cool World.
And eventually he got tired of the grind and waiting for his chance, realizing he wasn't going to be picked out by some director, so he went to Connie Rasinski for animation work, and he got some generic shots and a few scenes from Deputy Dog.
Yep.
And apparently he pissed off a bunch of people doing that because he was kind of trying to climb the ladder without going through the proper channels of the unions at the time.
Yeah.
But under Rasinski's tutelage, Bakshi eventually became the director due to demand from the studio, because they were low on people.
Yeah.
First directing 3 episodes of the Deputy Dog Show. His major breakout when Terry Toons began failing because there was a lot of other cartoon companies coming around that were dominating the market.
Yep, they could do it faster and cheaper.
And they were covering things that Terry Toons wasn't covering. Terry Toons was still kind of stuck back in the old era.
Definitely.
But he kind of saved them a little bit when he pitched the Mighty Heroes to CBS about a group of fucked up superheroes.
Yeah.
And then eventually he left Terry Toons in 1968 to found his own studio, Bakshi Productions.
One of those ones that a lot of people point back to is like the start of his big works, because that's where he really started to get more of his writing chops. Like, granted, a lot of it was still like, oh, well polished through other people, but a lot of people will look at that as like his beginnings of like getting the Bakshi brand started.
Yeah, and I mean, he also had a little bit of leeway because Bakshi Productions was successful. Yeah. He got burned by a few major studios during his career, but he was a career artist, and notably, one of his works was the 1968 to 1970 Spider-Man cartoon.
Now, Meme Central.
Yep. So if you see the pointing Spider-Man...
I was going to say, everyone has at least seen a sticker of that version of Spider-Man, at minimum.
Yeah, but there's one thing he said notably that I think fits his style altogether. He said, fuck that, animation is any goddamn thing you want it to be, in reference to an era when Disney was monopolizing the market with, like, Winnie the Pooh and... forget what else they mentioned was coming out around that time.
Yeah. Well, and by this point, Disney had taken down a bunch of other big animation studios around them. And so there was really kind of Disney and then everyone else. And the and everyone else was not as like, oh, I like, this specific thing. Like, I'm specifically a Pixar fan, or I'm specifically a Don Bluth fan. It was literally the other people. It was just everyone not Disney that got kind of grouped together.
I still say fuck Disney. I don't.
I totally get it. This was during the era, too, where if it didn't look like Disney, people weren't buying it. So there was not room for more artistic or creative-looking styled studios to really expand. For a while, Don Bluth was that, intermediate, but he famously moved over to more Disney-esque style to try and keep the studio floating. And, I mean, he also had some Disney background in him, so, there was some people who felt like he always kind of looked a little bit like a more polished Disney, whereas Bakshi was really the only one who was developing a very realistic style that was translating across all of his works slowly but surely. Granted, with the exception of the Lord of the Rings Outliner, which is its own weird little special child. But, there wasn't a Leica Studios where you could see a still from it and just point and immediately know, that's what it is. You don't even need to see the movie. Yeah. Because everyone, to be successful, needed to look like Disney.
Be the knockoff that your parents accidentally bought before there were blockbusters.
Yeah. And granted, this was also during, the beginning of the Disney hype. So, people being hard fans for the company. So, having other animation studios was becoming more and more difficult. Having animation studios for kids-specific animation was becoming near impossible. So him filling this void of a very unique style and being more willing to take on very adult-specific animations.
Oh, yeah.
Was honestly filling a huge void in the market at this time period.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, his first feature film was the adaptation of Robert Crumb's Fritz the Cat, and it became the first X-rated animated film in the U.S., which we gotta remember at this time, this is in the late 60s, X-rated isn't associated with the pornography scene just yet. It's still associated with more artsy-ish kind of stuff. I think Sweet Sweetback, Sweet Revenge is part of that era too. So it's kind of a little bit of a different time frame than what we think of. But that being said, we're also in an era where in the 70s there's quite a rise of adult animation, not just in the US, but in Japan. Within a couple of years of this, we have like Belladonna of Sadness. There's a pornographic one called Cleopatra that came out slightly before this.
And also, like, having adult-centered comics was starting to be, like, an actual thing. Comics weren't just kid material anymore, and so having that audience to help pull into a theater definitely was, like, where Bakshi was starting to, like, get a following. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what Bakshi brings up, is that he grew up in the underground. That's where he cut his teeth, really, of like pushing the art form past what it is, and I mean, really opening up the gateways of like, hey, wait, we can do cartoons about a cat that's making fun of all the cool hippie white kids of the time, and I want to watch that because I went down a little bit of a Bakshi rabbit hole for part of the year. There's still a couple I haven't gotten my hands on. But, like, Fritz the Cat just made me think of Holiday in Cambodia by the Dead Kennedys.
Yeah, definitely.
Again, I do highly recommend reading Unfiltered if you have time and want to learn more about Bakshi and his life and history.
Oh, definitely.
It's a very brief rundown up to Fritz the Cat, because he's got a lot more after that.
Oh, yeah.
And we are doing his final feature film, Cool World, because, honestly, of the ones I've seen, it is his most accessible, least political one.
Definitely. This was one that is also an outlier because he was, I don't want to say controlling, because we've seen directors and writers who are very controlling with their works. Bakshi was just passionate about his works. This was one that he started off very passionate about. He had a 10-ish year gap when he was directing. And this was him coming back and be like, all right, this is going to be my last big thing, you know, or at least a comeback call for me. He had this really big idea. Granted, on paper, the idea sounds really dope. He pitched it. He got a whole bunch of interest for it. And then the actual movie showed up. And this is one of the ones that, like, if you were a fan of his, I have no doubt you went to go see this. And it was not what you thought it was.
Yeah.
Especially compared to his other repertoires that had, like, really had a fan base by this point.
Yeah, and the thing with that is it was with the marketability, because he went to Paramount with concept drawings and they liked it. They liked the noir style for it, not to mention, as we brought up earlier, Who Framed Roger Rabbit 4 years before helped grease those wheels a little bit.
Oh, definitely.
But in taking it to the studio, it had to be toned down for a larger marketability. And I completely get that, especially like going to see, like, if you go like by those standards too, a lot of on the surface level movies like Coonskin look like they're going to be offensive, and they are, but they're meant to be, and they're doing it in a satirical manner that's more so poking fun at the animation styles of the time and the stereotypes.
Very true. Now, do you know about the original actual pitch of this movie?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Because the actual pitch, because I watched this movie, I've seen this movie so many times. I rewatched this movie, and then I read the original pitch, and I thought to myself, wow, if I was a, like, hardcore fan, I would have been pissed.
Oh, yeah.
That this is the movie I got. And this is coming from someone who truly does like Cool World.
Exactly. The for those who don't know, the original pitch of this movie was it was going to be a woman who gets pregnant. An animated woman.
A cartoon.
Yeah, an animated woman who gets pregnant and gives birth to it was going to be a horror film, half alive, half animated creature.
Little daughter, who was then going to go to the real world to find and murder her dad.
Yes.
For abandoning her cartoon mother, who, the only part that I can tell that did make it through the whole thing was the animator was supposed to have animated her in prison. and like have a cult following from his animation and cartoons in prison, and thus gets his cartoon wife, who he gets pregnant and then bails because he gets out of prison. And then his half-cartoon daughter is supposed to come and murder him.
He's just all those weeaboos we know that draw their own material to have fun with.
Yes, and okay, that's something that honestly probably would have had a better lasting effect than Cool World.
Mm-hmm.
Because don't get me wrong, the Cool World we got, I love. I think it's very cool, I really enjoy it, but knowing the symbolism and the depth of, like, thought process of the world and the critiques that he normally has, the horror one where the nerdy kid gets, like, finally murdered for being a creep to his own animations, makes so much more sense for him as a director and a writer.
Oh, yeah.
The thing is, though, is he went to the studios and they greenlit his original writing, got him started, hired the 2 writers to rewrite the script, and forgot to tell him they were doing that until they really got going and papers were signed. Well,
and he does also bring up that he realized that he brought them to the studios to make the movie.
Yes.
And he did kind of lose a little bit of control because he got what he wanted in the film, but also they got what they wanted. And he's like, it's my fault for bringing it to them first. And that's what I like about listening to him talk, is he's very realistic about his expectations of, he's like, yeah, this would have been cool, but it's also, they put the money up for it, so I can't complain about that.
And there's a long-standing rumor with Cool World that this was the movie that broke him and, like, turned him into a big asshole. Because he was apparently a real pain in the ass of a director. And he has, over the years, come back and said, you know what? Yes, I was. Because I was pissed that I wasn't getting the movie that I thought I was getting.
Yeah.
And he's like, I was mean to people. I've since apologized. It was not their fault. That was me. However, there is a rumor floating around that he punched people while they were working on this. That has come through that he yelled, but he claims he has not punched anybody over Cool World.
Yeah. From what he talked, I wouldn't think he would punch someone, just because the way he talks about it, he's just like, to make a movie, you have to let the people be free. So he let the actors do what they needed to do. He wasn't that controlling of it as we think of with, like, someone like Stanley Kubrick.
And I think the pathway had not been laid yet for the directors to be as controlling as, like, especially we've gotten very bad. Like, it's gotten to the verge of out of hand in some circles, right? I think it's just very interesting that has been the rumor that has followed this movie around. Because on top of him not liking the direction they ended up going, because normally, again, we talked about he's usually doing a lot of commentary on the world and the irony of the world around him. And the biggest irony of the world was the promotion material for this movie. They put a 75-foot cutout of Holly on the Hollywood sign. And they did that by paying $27,000 and then paying another $27,000 to clean it up. And the residents of Hollywood did not like this.
Well, they can stick it up their ass.
Well, they sued. They sued because this was something that was not approved.
Oh, fuck.
But this is where I think his movie accidentally, like, turned back around and came back to his original stance. Because how ironic is it that the giant Hollywood sign that is literally just advertisement for Hollywood, the movie-making place of the world, had a giant advertisement put on it, and people didn't like that.
Well, I also think it's a good standpoint, because that's been the issue with animation. I think we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence with this, especially with the rise in popularity of anime.
Definitely.
Is that cartoons still, or anything animated, still has that stigma against it of being for children.
Yes.
And by doing that, it kind of proved it a little bit, too, of, like, if they had put something more iconic up there, people would have been all over it. Mm-hmm. If you actually stuck Marilyn Monroe up there, hell yeah, they'd be for it.
Yes.
But because it was a cartoon is why they're getting pissy about it, too.
And this was also the one that, for a lot of his fans, originally they were pissed because he had made a room for adult-specific entertainment that was definitely not kid-friendly. Fritz the Cat being most people's, like, shining example of this, right? Where just because it's animated does not mean it's for children's eyes.
Yeah, I went into Fritz the Cat completely blind.
I
knew it would be raunchy, but
it's real raunchy.
I was not expecting all the furry stuff.
Yeah, no, it goes full in, doesn't it? Yeah.
Fritz definitely goes full in.
Haha. Yeah, a lot of people were expecting the same from Cool World.
Mhm.
And honestly, he was too. This was meant to be a horror film, and he tried very hard for this to end up with an R rating. That was his goal. He was like, if we're gonna settle somewhere, we were gonna aim for R. And the studios were like, no, this is gonna be PG-13.
Yep, because of marketing, like every horror film.
Which took out a lot of the direct weird scenes that normally would have in his fan base really marked his style.
Mm-hmm.
And because we went down to PG-13, a lot of those are now just implied. Which, honestly, is why a lot of people don't like using him anymore as the example of why not everything is for children. Because they managed to make the not for children movie for children.
Ish.
It's still not. It's still
No.
It shouldn't be. However, they took out the very hard-hitting, nope, should leave the studio, should leave the theater.
Chris, before we get into Cool World, what are we drinking today?
Well, everyone in this goddamn movie is an alcoholic. And I have a lot of driving, and it's Christmas week, which means my liver has much to do.
Yes.
So we're going to be drinking water.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Technically, this gets released on the 1st of the year, so...
That's even worse. There's more to drink than anywhere else.
Yes. So, Cool World.
Oh, Cool World.
When I went into this,
Yeah.
I had no clue I knew it was Roger Rabbit-esque.
Okay, so you went full blind.
That's how I go into most of the stuff that we pick that I've never seen before, is I go full blind into it. And that was how I did it with Bakshi. Before we decided to do Cool World,
Mm-hmm.
I had only seen The Lord of the Rings. I'd never seen any of his other stuff, so
the one that doesn't apply to any of his other works.
No,
Good. I'm
no.
so glad that's where you began.
Exactly. But the funky music over the opening credits is something I've noticed with him, is all his movies, except for Fritz the Cat, kind of start off that way, is
Yeah.
dark screen credits music.
Yes.
But I think the song Play With Me sets the tone quite a bit for Hollywood.
This music was one of the pieces that made this as fast a cult classic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this is tracks that Warner Brothers Recording Studio owned the licenses for. So they were tracks that people kind of knew, but weren't fully out there. And then, of course, David Bowie had the single track Real Cool World for this, which David Bowie, how can you not?
I was not expecting that at the end.
I know, a lot of people weren't. This music was almost immediately put to CD and then also re-released for an All-Stars, which if anyone remembers, that series is a bit like Kid Bop, but for adults. And I believe Shrek also had a version, but it's not directly ever called the Shrek one or the Cool World one. It's just all of the songs that I believe Warner Brothers Studio owns. They put out a CD every year and they're like, look at the fun music.
Oh, yeah.
It's
something like that.
It's Greatest Hits Volume 1800. But that CD went out almost immediately after the movie, and people bought it immediately. And this is still a soundtrack that people still enjoy and listen to.
I did not even pay attention to the music that much.
The music is all so normal pop music. But it's so early, 90s, late 80s vibe music. And I think a lot of people, because this movie is so trippy, it's so visual, you can just kind of jive with it the whole time. And it really did help turn this, because, let's be real, people hated this movie. Yeah. But they loved the music.
Yeah. Well, that's something interesting, because this movie kicks off with Las Vegas 1945 and all-American Brad Pitt coming home from the war, which...
Look at baby face Brad Pitt.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting is that when we say Brad Pitt now, we forget that in this movie he was chosen, but it was a risk because no one really knew who he was. He wasn't the star we know of him now, because I was talking with my brother actually today about this.
Yeah.
He said he'd never seen a Brad Pitt movie, and that's how he got to watch Snatch.
There is no way on this earth he's never seen a Brad Pitt movie.
Don't know he's never seen a bad Pitt
okay,
movie.
That is different. I would argue there's many.
Yeah. But at this time, his only breakout role really was Thelma and Louise, which came out the year before.
Very good movie.
We're 3 years away from Interview with a Vampire.
Also good.
4 years away from Seven and 12 Monkeys, which are arguably his two biggest roles that really kicked him off.
I would agree.
And also not to mention his tie to Tarantino with his stoner role in True Romance.
Yeah.
As well, he was in A River Runs Through It, which, fun note with that one, is the only film my 11th grade English teacher thought was worth watching.
Really? That one?
Because
Out of all of them?
It was the closest to the book.
I would argue it's not, but okay. I can see their point.
She looked like Edna Mode and she acted like it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
So at this point in his career, yes, this is not Brad Pitt for Brad Pitt name. However, what Brad Pitt was by this point was a beautiful, beautiful man. And so even though he did not have the fan base of like a normal actor, he did have a fan base of people who thought Brad Pitt was very handsome.
Yeah.
So there was, he had many a fan follower. He had many a person who would go see a movie with him in it, not because it's Brad Pitt, but because he's that hot boy.
Inglourious Bastards compared to this.
Yes. And so the other thing that is fascinating is Brad Pitt is one of those celebrities who I don't love. I never quite saw the appeal. But I find the lip filler and Botox fascinating. And so to see very young Brad Pitt, pre-injections, pre-supposed theoretical cheek job, like, is mind-blowing. Because now you look at pictures of him, and people say Brad Pitt doesn't age. And I would argue that we're not going back far enough to prove that he is aging.
Yeah, because they're looking at, like, Seven in these movies that came out almost half a decade after this.
Yes. He is such a baby face, but he's perfect for this movie. Because he isn't Brad Pitt just yet, which means we haven't reached full Brad Pitt sassy and also stupid action movie Brad Pitt.
Fair.
And that's perfect for this movie because it helps make this feel a little bit more rough and like a little bit less like a polished studio work, despite the fact that this is one of the director's final films.
Yeah. I do like the introduction of his character. He's the very down-to-earth country boy with his new motorcycle, just happy, but his mom's a little worried, which is a nice touch, and leaving their dinner frying while going on a joyride is a interesting plot point that never gets explored again.
No, it sure doesn't. I'm so glad you mentioned that they leave the dinner. While I was researching people's reaction and feelings for this movie, someone pointed out that this is one of the very few Brad Pitt movies where he doesn't eat in the movie.
Yeah, because he's in Toon World most of the movie. And they had the opportunity to have him take a bite. And I didn't realize this was a Brad Pitt thing until I looked into other Brad Pitt fan people. And yes, much like how some people put feet in most of their movies as like a fun little like tee-hee, look, you see it, I see it. You're indulging in my fetish now.
Yeah, apparently Brad Pitt just ends up in a lot of movies where he has to take a bite of food in at least one scene. And it, I guess, became a bit of a running joke for a while that Brad Pitt eats in every movie. He does not eat in Cool World. I didn't realize this was a thing because, again, I'm not that big a Brad Pitt fan. But yeah, apparently, this for a while, and granted, he's in a lot of movies. I don't know how much this, like, tracks anymore. It might be, like, a rule that has more exceptions than realities.
I gotta keep an eye on that for now.
But now it's something I will be watching because, yeah, I found it very interesting because someone was like, they got so close to having him take a bite, and instead he has to go kill his mom on the motorcycle.
Well, he doesn't. There's a wild casino and a couple drunk people.
True.
Which I was curious a little bit about, like, the history of Vegas because...
Oh, I love the history of Vegas. It's one of my favorite architecture facts.
I have thoughts on Vegas. But...
Oh, welcome to my world. I have so many thoughts about Vegas and its morality.
Well, I was just curious of, like, what Vegas was like in the 40s. And
oh, sure.
I think that's an interesting time to set it because this is the year that the Strip was established. So this is, like, the beginning of the Vegas we know and dislike. Or I dislike, at least.
Oh, no. This was OG Vegas. And a lot of the Strip is, at least... thematically, tried so hard to be the same for so long, and we have since left. We've reached a new pinnacle that Vegas is unrecognizable from 40s Vegas, and I love that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's unrecognizable from like 20, 30 years ago.
Well, there was a huge movement for a while to keep Vegas looking the way that this Vegas looks.
Yeah.
This was iconic for a long time. This was a monumental movement in the styling of, like, the Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
Vegas was like no other architecture at the time.
It felt like a fusion between the old Western town, but with a lot more lights.
It was the weirdest paradise in the desert.
Branson, Missouri is like it a little bit.
Okay, so Branson, Missouri is based off of Vegas.
Oh, I know.
However, the thing that separates Branson, Missouri from Vegas is God and Jesus. There is a church on every corner in Branson, Missouri. Whereas Vegas was specifically built because they needed to get around a couple of laws.
Branson, the family-friendly Vegas.
Oh, yes. But also, so much lights, so many activities to do.
Yeah.
So much mini-golf.
Yeah. But I do like this introduction when they do crash and the mom dies, because it's rough and tragic, and it's also showing the PTSD not in a positive light. I mean,
true.
We still see a lot of World War II, and like we're still kind of the heroes in that.
Yeah, no, this is a very good way of like switching that up to have a more personal and connected, like traumatic, like backstory sort of situation. Because also we have to get to that noir cop like hardened heart thing.
Yeah, well, it's also...
How better than have your mom die?
Well, it's also showing that he's not in a good mental state to begin with there. Like, I mean,
True.
he's just coming back from World War II. He's obviously seen some shit.
Yeah, he's
now
having a bad time.
Dead mom on top of that is...
And he killed her. In his mind, he killed her.
Yeah.
Even though it's technically not his fault, in his head, he was the one who was driving the motorcycle.
Definitely burnt down their house because they didn't return.
Yeah... Yeah, that's a good point. That house is toast.
But it's all a good way of setting up Frank to be this hardened cop here relatively shortly before we get this.
This is a great speed run to crime noir.
Because his world's torn apart by some machine. And
yes, this makes no sense because it's like a sudden acid trip.
Yeah, he's transported to...
Toon World.
Cool World.
Well, yeah. Which is, of course, a play on Toon World.
Yeah. And I mean, our first introduction to the Doodles are kind of creepy because it's the two big bodyguard guys and then the one, like, very stereotypical, clumsy, professor-like character. Someone,
when they did their original review of this movie when it came out, made a note that they felt that the acid that the animators took got stronger and stronger as the movie progressed. And... when you first get into the art stylings, especially if you are not a Bakshi fan, I think Cool World is a lot of people's intro to him, especially nowadays. And you start off, and it is a little bit Roger Rabbit-esque. And so you feel like you're comfortable. You feel like you kind of know what's happening here.
Well, so there is something with that, where I do think it is making a little bit on... Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
It definitely is playing off of it.
But this is one of my big complaints about this movie is the introduction to the world and the Doodles. Yeah. Is that instead of like the zany and kind of already like integrated part of the world like Who Framed Roger Rabbit is, we're just introduced with a relatively bland exposition piece from the Doctor just explaining the whole world dynamic of, I was supposed to go to your world, but I accidentally pulled you here. Like a shitty, more depressing Kingdom Hearts. It
is 100% a shitty, less emo Kingdom Hearts and more hardened noir one. But the other thing that I love, and this is, I think, where Who Framed Roger Rabbit really held a gun to Cool World's head and said, I am master, bow before me, is the world of Cool World itself looks like shitty, acid-tripped Gotham, where there is no extra stuff happening. There is just sadness and darkness and rain all the time. Because, again, this is trying to play off of a crime noir sort of situation. And also is, again, remember, meant to be a horror movie originally.
Yeah, it's also putting, like, very stereotypical, like, styled animations in a less than family-friendly usual context.
And because they are going for, essentially, a city filled of nothing but casinos and bars, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, despite having those things... plays off of having streets and towns and buildings and houses. Like, there is a fully developed city there. And this is the same complaint that I have for Gotham. Even though I love Gotham very much. There is nothing there because it's fucking nighttime all the time.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is we haven't even been introduced to Cool World yet. We just
were told about Cool World.
Yeah, we just have the lab, and then we jump to 1992 with the prisoner Jack Deeds drawing Holly.
I have questions about this, and we have done several Now movies with prisons in them. And I attempted very hard to understand the prison system as best I could for those movies. However, those were usually action movies that we were going for.
This is action.
It is technically action.
Yeah.
How much animation shit can you get into prison?
How big is his goddamn cell? He has a whole drafting desk and a...
His drafting desk is nicer than my drafting desk. Yeah. And I went to school for this.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because, like, the whole premise of, like, him getting brought into Cool World is constant throughout this movie of him just somehow being able to, like, connect there.
Yeah,
and I don't...
okay, I'm glad that you are also confused by this. I don't understand the rules of Cool World.
Mm-hmm.
Because he can just see Holly 3-dimensionally, randomly. Like, he's just sketching away, drawing his beautiful lady wife, his little waifu, on his paper in prison. You do you, man. You're in prison. I don't care. And she suddenly is, like, coming to life and beckoning him?
Well,
is he, like, imbued with magic abilities?
So there is one thing that I have noted a little bit later on. I forget which line they say, but it implies that people who are mentally ill is because their mind's not completely in our world. Their mind's kind of split between two different worlds. So he's a tormented, twisted person who his mind, we find out later he killed his wife's lover, which is very minimal to the plot. And the only reason he's in prison, he could have been anywhere else. I don't get why we have to do the whole prison bullshit with it.
Because that was the only piece from the original plot, was that he was supposed to become famous in prison, and art was supposed to be the thing he found in prison, and thus created his weird wife that was going to have his half-breed child.
That explains the comic book store scene later. Okay,
yes.
that makes more sense.
This is literally the only original piece.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that's the whole point of what it's going for, is that those who have this connection to that side are
mentally ill.
A little bit.
Okay. I can see it, and now that you've said that, it does make sense, because there's some one-liners later on that I've been confused about since I watched this movie originally in high school. The thing, though, that still I have questions about is, so our first man, our dear sweet Frank, he is messed up because, A, he accidentally killed his mom on a motorcycle, and then their house probably burnt down because she was cooking and she just left that shit on the stove. But he also was originally, like, PTSD'd from being a veteran.
Yeah.
That was that was a lot of people that came back. Are all of them flopping around in Cool World?
No, because most of them, their mothers didn't die in a motorcycle accident.
I would argue that more than just one did.
Yeah. Well,
in all of America?
Well, that's the other thing, too, is the movie, as it progresses, we're so all over the place with all the characters that we have to bring back and forth that Frank's whole trauma never gets explored. Like, we're done with his trauma until,
screw Frank, honestly.
Yeah.
But with that said, now that you have put this theory out, it actually does work. Because Frank's entire job is to keep people from doing it with the cartoons.
Yes.
Which implies that there's more than just him hanging out in Cool World. That there's other humans that he has to police.
I'll get into that a little bit. I have some questions on that.
I also have questions.
There are things that get brought up with that a little bit later on.
All right, well, right now I'm going to run with your theory that these are all just World War II veterans hanging out in Cool World.
It's set in 1992, so we've got Vietnam, we got the Korean War.
Oh, we have so many people who have problems.
What about the people from World War I? Because I'll get into
They're not dead yet, you're right.
Yeah, well, I have some thoughts on this.
Okay.
Yeah. But one thing I think is interesting about the way they did Cool World is that they had difficulties with animating this.
They sure did.
Because while the world is very dark and twisted, they were locked into it because they did the real footage first.
Yep.
And then had to animate around it, which is very similar to the rest of Bakshi's style of doing the rotoscoping.
Which you can watch directly if you watch the Lord of the Rings one, because they forgot to erase a half of that.
Yes.
Which I loved. As a movie nerd, I love that. However, especially when you put it side by side from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which again came out first, this one looks less polished because they didn't have, like, real props to work with. The animation was done after the acting, so there was definitely some, like, clearly working around that Who Framed Roger Rabbit hid better.
But this one addresses it in a different way, because
they do.
A lot of the background is just paintings that were pasted onto real sets, which I think is a cool way to go about this.
Yeah, it looks good. And
that was done by Barry Jackson. I want to bring him up just because he was a designer for American Pop, which is one of Bakshi's I haven't seen yet. But he was gone on to work on other movies in varying design capacities, such as The Prince of Egypt.
So good.
Titan AE.
Also very good.
And How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the Jim Carrey one that you hate.
I do hate, however, I will give props to the actual prop and set. I mean, clearly the art department was doing something right. It visually looks great. I just hate the man in the green suit. Could have been anybody else, but also it definitely couldn't have been anyone else. Clearly he's the correct choice. I'm just biased.
Real quick on The Grinch.
Yeah.
One, I was listening to Chat Tsunami's episode on it. They brought up something also weird with it, is that everyone refers to it as Jim Carrey's Grinch and not Ron Howard's Grinch.
That's true and sad, because Ron Howard did try really hard in that film, but, I mean, Jim Carrey, claimed to have needed military-grade training to make it through, even though an 8-year-old boy also did the same thing.
Yeah.
So, I get it. I get it.
But, back to Cool World. I do like the way they're building up the style of Cool World initially, where it's chaotic, it feels like it's a real jumping joint, and even, like, the props are 2D-ish.
Yeah, that's true. They do a good job of, like, getting the initial set. My main complaint is that they never build. This is all we get.
Yeah, we see some of it in, like, other media, like, I'm currently playing Okami.
Sure.
How some of that environment's set up where it's just a 2D object that rotates around your perspective of it.
Yeah. However, like, I think part of the reason why it bothers me is this is one of those worlds where, like, we get this really cool setup of it being very dirty and grungy city, a lot of backlife, there's a lot of bars and, like, nightlife happening in this town, and yet none of these places have any distinction. Even the, like, big landmarks, like, eventually we get to the girlfriend's apartment, or we get to the main bar/dance place. They don't stand out in any way.
Yeah, it's all just backgrounds.
It's all just backgrounds, but not even backgrounds with enough style or personality for you to say, oh, that's the nightclub that Holly dances at. Because you can't tell because it's just dark. And, like, it looks good, but because there's no, like, solidity to any of these sets, it all blurs together really badly by the time we get to the end of this movie.
It's because of the chaos, but I think maybe that ties in quite well with it, too, because of how many cartoons have been pushed out and how many, like, low-budget ones, because it feels very full of generic characters that have been kind of forgotten and thrown to the wayside.
And that was definitely on purpose. There's a bunch of different styles pulled from a bunch of different artists in here. There's a couple of people on YouTube who go through and, like, pinpoint specific characters that are clearly from fill in X, Y, and Z artists here, which, if you're interested, is an interesting deep dive, but, like, we don't have time to pinpoint all these characters without visual aids.
Well, and I think that plays with it, too, because the focus isn't the world, whereas, like, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the world is such a big part of it, whereas Cool World is more of a backdrop for the rest of the plot to happen within.
And there's definitely a lot more emphasis on the characters themselves, because they are truly the things suffering in this world. There's not a lot of happiness happening here.
Oh, yes, because Hollywood is so suffering, busting it down with all the other doodles going wild.
See, okay, she is the thing that kept this movie going for a lot of people, because her imbalance between what she says and what she does is so fascinating, because she's clearly having a great time here. And yet, in the next scene, she bitches and moans about how she hates it here.
We'll get into that in just a second, because that's the thing is with her, this is our introduction to her.
Yes, and it's a lot of people's introduction to Holly.
Yeah, it's... The one thing they were worried about was pushing the sexuality of it, and I think they do a very good line of towing between being obscene and pornographic, whereas she's like a more updated... super blonde bombshell like Marilyn Monroe, which they bring her up later.
I'm glad you say that, because originally her original concept was a play on a porn film. I can't remember the exact name, but the original character's name was Dolly because it was part of the porn that he, like, was referencing. Granted, a lot of this character's design was specifically meant to look kind of like Kim in real life. So that way when she, like, switched over, they weren't going to have to do a ton of extra work.
Yeah.
But they definitely were going for the whole, like, poster bombshell, like, World War II, posted on the wall level, silly, sassy.
Yeah, well, Basinger even said that they also said that she brought a lot to the character. She even came up with a name, which, if you break it down, sounds like a porn star name.
Yes, which was kind of the whole point.
Yeah, her name is Holly, and then her last name is Wood.
Spelled like she would do it.
Yeah, she wants to do it. That is her whole character.
That is literally her entire motivation.
Yeah.
But they stick to it in such a smart way that it becomes a compelling argument for a character. I would argue that some other versions of this, like, bombshell character trope, especially in more B movies that we've talked about or watched just in our free time, those ladies aren't convincing because they are lacking this background, like, conviction to the plot, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about one of them next week.
Yes, we are. And she manages to make this character, which would normally be on the verge of upsetting, an interesting and convicting archetype. Because she is more than just, like, this, like, background side female, like, femme fatale.
I think what does it is she's not ditzy. She's very determined.
She's very, and, like, just because she wants the stupidest thing for the movie, it works because that's the whole point of the movie.
Yeah, well, it makes her a strong character because, in a way, we find out she's kind of weaponizing her sexuality.
100% she is. That's her whole thing.
Well, and we'll get into it just real quick, because it is in the next scene that we get that. Deebs gets sent back to real world, and then we get back to cool world and introduced to Sparky and the Ragamuffins who are up to no good.
Yep, sure. Why not?
But that's the other thing, too, is that everything is kind of a joke in this movie on top of that. And I think part of while Hollywood is a compelling character, she's also kind of put at the bottom of everything. Like, it's her. I don't get her purpose other than, like, something as a convenient plot point.
I would argue that her purpose in this movie is loosely the villain, because there's not really. I mean, I guess you could say the artist is, like, he's kind of the villain. However, I would argue that Holly manages to make herself the villain by wanting something so badly she's willing to sacrifice everyone in this world for it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is, like, she's not... That's the other thing that's interesting about the ambiguity of her as well, is that her as an antagonist, because I don't want to say villain, because she's not a bad person per se.
No, she's not a bad person, and yet her willingness to let everything else burn for her, like, desire, it is evil. It's self-centered, it's selfish, it's silly, but it is, in a way, evil.
Yeah, not intentionally evil, I would say.
No, at least not at first.
No, but this is also the scene where we get her referencing Marilyn Monroe of, like, oh, she's great. We find out about some Vegas Vic guy. Yeah. But this is where we have that self-centered goal and fascination with the reality and what they call the humans noids.
Yeah. So, like, a humanoid? It's Noid for short.
I'm an idiot.
It's okay.
I didn't even make that connection.
It's okay. This is also the scene where we get one of many lines declaring that Frank's entire existence is to be the police to keep humans from having sex with the doodles. Yeah. Which does imply that there are several people who at least temporarily make it here, which does go with your theory from earlier.
Yes. So that's the thing, is he does say that there's occasionally ones that pop up.
They never seem to stick around as much as he does. He's stuck here.
Yeah.
He can't leave.
Deebs keeps making a return. And yeah, it is that thing of, like, they're starting to bring, like, hey, there's the reason Deebs is there's a few screws loose, but they never explain how the other noids get into the world.
And, like, they gloss over it so much that if you are someone who is a detailed movie watcher, I think this is what bothered critics the first time around. Because this did not get good reviews off the gates. And I think this is the level of, like, missing slight bits of dialogue, where it either got cut or it just wasn't flushed out fully. Because not only is Frank here, there's cars here, like real cars.
Yes, that was one of my questions, how the real car gets there. And then also some of the physics of it, because sometimes it's a real car, but most of the time it's a 2D cutout.
No idea.
And then sometimes it's animated.
The rules of Cool World make no sense. However, the tune portions I don't care about. It's kind of in that same, like, you know, cartoon logic doesn't need to make sense, so I just kind of let it go sort of game plan. However, there's clearly some form of logic happening. We just don't get told what it is, ever. And I dug through interviews, I dug through fan theories that, like, tried to explain a bunch of this away. I went through all of these people who had, like, at some point worked with or, like, were talking about this movie. Nowhere does he ever bother to get back around to explaining how any of this goddamn shit works. And it bothers me to this day because it's going to get worse from here on out.
Soft magic system.
Which, okay. Normally I am more of a fan of soft magic. Cool World, I think a lot of people, especially the cult fans of it, give it a pass because of the cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
However, this is another part where Who Framed Roger Rabbit does it better. They explain how the Toonism works. It's done stupidly, it's done with Toon logic, but there's rules and they stick with them.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this one, it doesn't. And I'll get into some of these rules at the very end of this movie.
Yeah, because, boy, I'm so confused.
Yeah, but one thing that I think, going back to Hollywood a little bit...
Yes.
...is this scene, the way her fascination is, it's an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those... You know the weeb community.
I do. I know them well.
Of those guys who are only into 2D girls.
Yes.
She's the opposite of...
She's only into 3D.
Only into 3D.
Yeah.
But part of that is she has this ideal of what it is, where it's like... Well, also it sets her up that, as far as we know, it's her and Lynette, and, like, she's the hottest thing around.
She is,
where
yeah.
She's like, I'm not your ordinary doodle. She's not meant for this life. She has... She's... It makes me think of... Ty West's. Have you seen Pearl?
Mm-hmm. I have.
It makes me think of Pearl.
I totally see it.
But it's the way she talks about reality where I think it's still really relevant from our perspective looking in.
Mm-hmm.
It's that whole thing that you look at the screen and it's like, oh, this person's living a better life than me, yada, yada, yada. Where she says they really taste it and then they really do it. She's a nymphomaniac, obviously.
Oh, for sure. It's done in such a clever way of implying that, like, for somehow or some way, the Toon world is missing sensations, and yet none of the other Toons, including Soon We Shall Meet Girlfriend Toon, they never seem to have this complaint. It's just Holly who seems to have this, like, upsetness, because other Toons regularly make comments about, like, wanting to go have a smoke, wanting to go get a drink, doing it with their girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Holly's obsession with the real world. Yeah.
Well, and there's a couple things in this, too, the way Frank responds to her.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to bring this up is because he's a hardened cop now.
Yeah.
He seems over this shit.
He seems tired.
But he is tired. You want to know why?
Yeah.
Because as far as, we don't know how time works in Toon World.
Sure.
Or Cool World. But in the real world, he's been away for 47 years.
And this is another bit where the detailed audience had complaints.
Mm-hmm.
Because 47 years, it's Brad Pitt. Obviously, he has not aged. The man is now currently grandpa age and still apparently has not aged. So, like, of course, visually he hasn't aged. That was kind of the whole reason they hired him, was to be the beautiful man. However, when he goes back to the real world, he is not shocked or surprised by the changes of the world around him. I go back to my parents' house after a month, and I'm like, oh my god, look, they painted their siding. Hold on, we gotta drive slower. That person over there mowed their lawn recently. Like, he is not concerned about the world around him. And I'm okay with the Toon World time not working like normal world, because it's a cartoon world. In theory, if you draw something, it's there forever.
It's timeless, as some would say.
Thank you. And the only thing that really seems to have the Toons know what is happening is the humans coming to visit, or new Toons showing up in new styles, representing new things in the world. That seems to be the way they know what's happening.
Not even that, because they're still stuck in, like,
the
50s and 60s.
Oh, no, like, they don't get updated, but a new Toon occasionally shows up, and they're like, oh, that one's different.
Well, that's another question with that, too, is, because Deebs says it got into his mind. So the doodles don't seem like they're I think the logic with that is thinking that the doodles are a product of our world, whereas they clearly state we have been our own world.
Yes.
Deebs his mind's connected to us. So the doodle world is it's a completely different set of rules compared to what Deebs is even doing. So, like, it's existed pre any of those doodles.
100%. However, it's implied that other people other than Deebs are connecting in with it and making money off of the Toon World because there's a bunch of background characters that are directly, like, I don't want to say rip-offs. However, they're pretty damn close to other famous tunes.
That's another thing. I'm sure there's a lot of references in this that I don't get because I didn't grow up on a lot of American cartoons.
Honestly, a lot of these are, like, references that a lot of people miss because they were, like, for adults, quote-unquote.
Well,
or they were underground artists at the time.
Well, and also, there's a part in this scene that I am 100% sure is a Talking Heads reference.
Yeah.
When Frank is looking in the mirror, his suit is too wide. It's like...
Yeah.
But that's the thing with every single one of those is, like, for the most part, it's relatively subtle unless it's very blatant, like the Pinocchio reference or there's a Daffy Duck in the background.
Yeah, which, you know, clearly making fun of the whole Disney nonsense that happened.
Yeah, it's just an interesting scene before we get a little bit of the real world with going back to Vegas, which is a nice pairing because I think Vegas is a great choice because especially our perception of it, the city that never sleeps, it's super colorful and it's almost like a real world cartoon of decorated ducks.
Very true. And also it has that reputation, even from the beginning, of a sinful place. You know, anything goes. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so having just the most outlandish possible things happen, or the most ridiculous or crazy people be Vegas people, seems to, like, be the loophole to why some of these people exist and are famous. Because Deebs is very famous. He gets immediately recognized, which I question because I'm a nerd and I honestly would not be able to tell you who any, like, from face shots, who anybody is.
Yeah, there's...
Like, I could meet Mr. Studio Ghibli himself and I probably wouldn't clock it.
No. You've seen it. You've seen enough of Miyazaki.
I have. However, even though he is, like, very recognizable, if I took a vacation to Japan and I ran into a man in a corner store, I would not say to myself, that man is the creator of many beloved tales. I would think, that man kind of sort of looks like Hayao Miyazaki. I'm not going to say anything, though.
I have a feeling he wouldn't want you to approach him.
He definitely does not. I bet he doesn't leave his house if I was him. But, like, he goes into a random comic book store, which apparently is dedicated to his book. It just, like, has, like, only his work on the background. And he walks in and they're like, oh my god, it's you!
To this level of celebrity where he's getting... People are wanting his autograph who don't even know him.
Yes. Which is so stupid and I love it.
But it's also, like, that's...
It's, like, it almost feels like a delusion.
Well, it's also... Yeah, I agree with that, but it also feels like that little commentary on pop culture of people flocking to perceived celebrity.
Oh, no, this is one of those moments where, like, there's a lot of commentary happening in that one scene, and I wish we'd had a little bit more time to explore, like, because I do feel like maybe some of the background is him projecting. I doubt there is an entire bookstore dedicated to Cool World. He's been in prison a while. He's not been in prison long enough to have that much done.
I think they said 4 years is how long he was in prison.
That's not enough time to have an entire bookstore dedicated to your comic strip.
No. But the scene more so is to, one, show the popularity of Cool World and the delusion that he could have think that he created Cool World with his mind.
Definitely.
But also the fact that he's not interested in the girl that's flirting with him right then and there.
Yeah. But he's also a crazy person.
Yeah. But it's also interesting too because that 42-year time gap that's important to that plot of the movie.
Yeah.
To ground Cool World in its own reality. Because Deebs probably wasn't even born when Frank originally went to Cool World.
Probably not, and if he was, it proves that he's not the creator of Cool World, because he definitely wasn't drawing Cool World by then.
No, not at all.
He's only been drawing for 4 years, supposedly.
Exactly. But Deebs goes back home brooding, and he gets transported back to Cool World again.
Which, the logic of when people get transported makes no sense, because at first the logic seems to have been, with Frank, that, like, big emotions, big problems are what teleport you. But every time Jack goes, it's just kind of whenever it's convenient for the plot.
Yeah, because the thing that they brought up in the featurette is that it was more so he was supposed to be this brooding, tortured artist stereotype. Yeah. And I get none of that. It just looks like he's got to take, like, either one, he's got writer's block, or he's really got to take a shit and he just can't.
I agree with you. I think style-wise, like what they dressed him in, how they did hair, makeup, all that, I do think visually I can kind of see it.
Mm-hmm.
However, where it fails is like he doesn't do any broody behaviors. He shows up to a place where he's super famous and is upset that he's super famous to human people. God, oh my god, can't believe. And then he goes home and he's like, wonder what I should have for dinner. Mac and cheese or pizza? Bzz, gone.
Yeah. No, exactly. He's just brooding over his desk when he's transported.
Yeah, like it's not even... And we don't get any, like, build-up either. This movie is so, like, quick with its cutting that you have no time to sit there and, like, have him give some reminiscence or throw paper across the room or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think that's just Bakshi's style in general, because when I rewatched The Lord of the Rings, his adaptation, I forgot how quick-paced it was, where, like...
It breaks your neck how fast we go.
Oh, yeah, like, when they're like, Legolas is like, oh, yeah, here's our... we should go to Lothlorien. Welcome to Lothlorien. There's nothing like...
There's nothing in between.
There's no journey is what it is.
No, it's very much point A and point B you're touching.
Mm-hmm. But this is the part where we really do get Deeb's first real, I'll say real connection with Hollywood.
Sure.
Because the last time we saw them together, it was just like real quick before he was zapped back.
Mm-hmm.
But like this is where she is weaponizing his desires.
Yeah, no, she's definitely playing him.
Where she says, "Welcome to my world, big man."
Yeah.
And then his response is, "Am I dreaming you, or are you dreaming me?"
Yes. Yeah, no, he is getting played 100%.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's an interesting spot to show his mindset of he has lost grips with what is reality, because his world's I mean, this is, as far as we know, this is his first or his second time being brought into Cool World. And
however, he has been seeing like a 3D Holly for quite a while. I mean, Prison showed that.
Mentally ill.
I mean, so for all we know, he regularly has hallucinations of Holly being in his house.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. This is his thing of why Frank is so important to having parallel worlds is because without Frank, we don't know what's reality. We don't know what's really going on, because shared delusion's kind of out there.
That's true. That's true. We can't rule that out.
Yeah. But one other thing about this scene too is when he first comes back, we get this bit of goons playing dice with a very, very Disney rabbit.
Yes.
Classic Disney rabbit.
It's so cute. It's so fluffy.
Mm-hmm. But it's also that's the one thing that I don't get about part of this world, because we go to a police joint after this and it's cartoony and happy, which shows that there's layers and a kind of hierarchy to this world.
Sure. Because
this portion is very traditionally bright and playful, old school Disney-esque, whereas the rest of Cool, this is the only glimpse we see of this, because the rest of Cool World is dark, decrepit, and twisted, kind of like, it feels like a refuse of the junk doodles. Yes.
And this is where I wish there had been more room to breathe in the world building, because this idea of there being a hierarchy of like popular, fun, happy tunes having a better life than all of these sad, messed up tunes that like honestly Bakshi made like half of them. Like,
oh, all the sad ones are having a good time. It's only Holly who's not having a good time.
This is true, but like there's clearly like we have to separate the like fun, happy tune world from everyone else. And it's implied that, like, they are not living as nice a life as these other people who don't need constant cop protection. A man always paroling through your club to be there to be like, there's a human, get out of here. Scram.
Yeah,
but there's no room for that in this version of the story because it got reworked kind of haphazardly.
Yeah, it is all over the place, because after we get a relatively fun highway chase scene.
Yeah, it is cool.
We get back to Frank and his street lady, who we find out is actually his love interest, Lynette.
Yeah, his love interest, who he will not touch because that's his one rule.
Well, it's the rule of the world, but that's the thing is, like, Lynette is such a nothing character in this. Is like she's just her only purpose.
She's a bouncing board for him.
Yes, and then also just his quote unquote reason to stay in Cool World.
And the thing that disappoints me with her is like there felt like there was more for her. Like there felt like there was more dialogue or some other scenes that we just kind of missed on why her and him get along, what they see in each other, other than just like they're the two most standardly drawn together-esque. Like they visually look good together, so that's why they're together.
Yeah. And well, she's the very classic femme fatale or the love interest in a noir series, whereas like Holly is they are opposites of each other. However, Holly has so much time to develop more to herself other than just this like passionate, like single-minded person. She has time to develop that around herself and like have that become not just a character trait but a flaw that like drives her. Yeah.
This character has almost nothing because she's barely in this movie.
Yeah, she's only there in 3 scenes. This one, the bar scene, and then the very end.
And I would argue the very end barely counts because we're mostly focusing on the transformation.
Yeah. But this is a part 2 where it's brought up that the reason there's an interest in Deebs is for some reason, of the Noids that come through, he's not coming through a dream. Which
is also an interesting clip, but also implies that he's the most insane person, which does not make me feel good, but also would have been cooler if they had, like, explored that a little harder.
Tying into mental illness again.
Like, if they had really leaned into Deeds being the most crazy person, like, just on the verge of being the most crazy, serial killer of all time, right? That would have been so much cooler than just him being kind of a dweeb.
Yeah.
Who, like, sometimes is obsessed with his 2D girlfriend, who's obsessed with her 3D world.
Yeah, she's not even obsessed with him.
She's just using him because he's the only 3D idiot to come in that hasn't been caught.
She's the... Well... Yeah. Well,
everyone else gets shooed away by the policeman who lives outside her door.
Well, I mean, if you know the one...
character, like, at this point, why isn't she have, like, an ankle monitor on or something?
Yeah, she's the only character that he knows. I mean, he even complains to Lynette, is like, yeah, she's basically in heat again.
Yeah, like... She's clearly the problem here.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And apparently, she just now has her own bodyguard in this sad, decrepit man.
And he's not even a bodyguard. He's just kind of like complete. He's in such a daze this whole movie.
He's having such a bad time. He hates this.
Yeah. But I do also like the introduction to Nails, the spider detective that's Frank's partner.
Yeah, who gets to drive the real car.
Yeah. As they go to the club, which... there's something... I've got some questions about this club.
I probably don't have answers.
Oh, I know. There's no answers to this movie. So, the bouncer says no Noids.
Which does imply Noids are showing up regularly.
Yeah, a bit of anti-realism for the joint. And he says that, but when they go in there, Frank's already in there.
I think Frank probably has a free pass.
Well, he also has, when he flashes his badge, Cool World Police, #1.
Which does imply that there's, like, a human force and he's the only one on it.
Yeah, which, like, why is he a cop? Did he start the police?
No, there's no way he started the police.
Well, he's...
Cartoons of police have existed since the police started.
His badge is #1.
I think he's the only human on the force.
But why? I mean, we see a rabbit go to snitch to some other cops.
This is true. Okay, I fully believe that he showed up in Cool World and was like, well, I need to make a living somehow. I can't leave. I don't know how to get home. And instead of, like, working on trying to get home, he went, what should I do? I know, I can be a cop.
Yeah.
And so he went to the police force. They're like, well, you're a human. You can't work here. And he's like, please. And they're like, we'll just make a special force. And it's just him.
Well, that's the thing is, like, the cops it doesn't even...
They feel like they're just giving him busy work. Like, hey, send the human to go follow Holly around.
Well, that's the thing is, like, he feels like the Chris Hansen of Cool World, where
he sure does.
He's just like, come over. Why don't you have a seat here, Deebs? Did you know she was a doodle when she contacted you online?
Yeah, no, he 100% feels like that. One of the reviews that I watched complained that, like, why, when he enters your establishment, why wouldn't you just push the alarm button to be like, he's back, everybody wrap it up, everyone leave, he's here again.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing he does is bother people to not touch doodles.
Yeah. Yeah, he is... That's all he does. That's his whole purpose as a cop, as far as we know.
I believe it is the only purpose as a cop. I believe all of the other tunes are doing other cop shit.
Horty
without
police.
him. And no, they're just like, it's kind of a problem. He's really worried about it. We should do something.
It's just that meme of going to horny jail.
It is. And I very firmly believe that a huge part of his cop presence is due to the original script. They were like, we don't want the question of hybrid babies to exist. So his whole job now, instead of fathering the hybrid baby, is to keep them from being existing.
Yeah. It's some stuff that never gets explained. And that's the thing is, like, there's so much in this that just feels convenient. Like, don't get me wrong, I think the magic of the pen being brought in is cool, which
I love that.
Is showing why Deebs is an issue. Maybe it's not just because he's able to get through without having dreams, but it's because
he's a cartoonist.
Because he's a cartoonist, and he's bringing something that is potentially dangerous to their world. Contraband, to say. Yeah,
true.
Oh, unintentional smuggler himself.
You know, he's already messed up like several rules by being here, so
yeah. But also, this is where this is the first time Deebs gets the warning of don't sleep with a doodle, which
too late.
Yeah, giving him the warning that Hollywood's just using you. She'd screw anyone that was realistic, which also just implies that there's been enough noids that there's a no noid policy, and they've had something like this happen before?
Yes. Yeah, there's been an issue enough to, like, hire a guy to do just this.
And, I mean, it's a quick moment, too, because we're back to Frank's girlfriend's house, where we set up his conundrum of... It gives it a little personality that he loves this world, but he doesn't fit in, and also can't return to the real world. It says can't, but...
Yeah, this is where I wish we'd had a little bit more time to develop him and girlfriend and relationship of the world, because... the quote-unquote reward he gets at the end of this movie for trying the best feels a bit like a punishment.
Oh, I'll get into that a little. I have a lot of questions about the end of this movie.
Okay, good.
Because we don't have any time to linger on it because
no, this movie is so fast.
Deebs is tormented out in the desert, freaking out, and then gets come back, baby, and he's immediately back.
Okay, this is the other thing I don't understand. I understand there not being much logic for where you end up when you go from real world to Toon World. But it's kind of implied that, like, with the exception of our main guy, most people don't take their body with them. And yet, every time he goes back to the real world, he's just thrown into random places, like the desert, your kitchen, this other random place, the diner. Like, is there reason behind where we're going? Like, is the Toon World and the real world, like, overlapped somehow and you could, like, teleport between locations? I have
no clue.
No clue.
Holly finds him real quickly. She's got, like, Bulma's Dragon Ball tracker of, oop, here comes Dick.
Yeah, no, she's scary. Terrifying, really.
Yeah. Well, and because, like, he's already there, and, like, we see him in Cool World more than we see him in reality.
That's true.
And they don't do anything to develop him past being just the key for Holly.
That's true, but I'm kind of okay with it because it turns the focus away from sad cartoonist relationship with his doodle to an obsessed person who happens to be a doodle. And it's honestly a little bit more interesting of a story based off of what we've already, like, had to work with.
Yeah, actually, so that's something that's interesting about this movie is, of the characters, Hollywood is the most interesting of it.
Yeah.
Whereas in a very stereotypical cartoony movie like this, the woman's more the goal. Whereas Deebs is the nothing character that is used.
Yeah, he's honestly a side character in a way.
But also, one thing, I do really like the apartment tower that Holly's in.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
A really cool door knocker. And this is the part where we have some really rough green screening.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not as bad as other films that same studios have worked on. But it's also arguably bad enough that even for when this movie came out, it was a lot of people's critique, especially for how much money got put into this film. Granted, this wasn't like a super high budget movie, but it did have a pretty substantial amount of money poured into it.
Yeah.
Enough that this sort of error really should have been caught, which is disappointing, especially since this was, like, really advertised as the Who Framed Roger Rabbit for adults, and the green screening in Who Framed Roger Rabbit is very good.
Yes, no, exactly. But, I mean, because we get this mixture of, like, cartoon logic where Nails is allergic to clouds, and...
I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's
I
funny,
love that he's
but-
also scaling a building in his stupid little Mickey Mouse white gloves.
Yeah, and also Frank is just tied to him.
Yeah, just climbing up the building like he's climbing the cliffs of insanity.
Yeah. Well, also,
And then,
I mean, the other thing too is like he busts into this place acting like he has authority over anything, and like we see all the shit that happens around him regardless.
yeah, like he's such. It's almost in the equivalent of like, because he's real, he doesn't matter to any of these people.
Mhm.
He's just like a throwaway character to them.
Yeah, well, it's also, there's a couple lines in this where Holly at times feels like she could be his easy way back to reality,
Mm-hmm.
but he also is forcing his ideals onto her, where he says, you don't have what it takes to be real. Obviously, him dealing with coping of
Yeah,
reality is worse than this world.
which is why he's stuck here. Let's be real. Like, that
Yeah.
was meant to be the parallel you were supposed to make the whole time, and yet we never quite got there, I think, from like an easy jump.
No, not at all. But it's also be content with the cards you're dealt with. He's dealing with it
Sure.
in his own way. But
And in his defense, he doesn't know that we've been down here for 40-something years, and that, honestly, she'd do really well in Vegas.
or maybe he's been spending 47 years trying to keep Holly from banging anyone that walks in.
That's true. It's been a lifetime, really.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's the thing is that's the question of like the timeline in this movie is
I was like, does he recognize how long it's been?
yeah, because he is much colder than the first time we meet him. So I assume he's been down there a long time, or he's been down there long enough where
He
he's
doesn't.
a
Yeah,
little tired of it.
yeah, but like a little tired could happen after 1-2 years.
Mhm.
Does he know he's been down there for like a really long time? I don't think so.
No, not at all. I think the other thing that makes Deebs interesting in this upcoming scene
Mm-hmm.
is that he's forced into this
True.
like the private bowler stud, where we said he's a nothing character and he's along for the ride.
He really is.
Which makes me question,
Mm-hmm.
when they are starting to get down to business,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do all the doodles know that they're about to screw? Like, are they
I don't know, but they're like building a tower outside to see in the window.
Well,
like
and
creepies.
And it's not just that, like, everyone is psychically linked. We got this montage of everyone like, oh, one of us is getting lucky with annoyed.
That, or Holly has like a speaker system on her like apartment that's just broadcasting this to the world.
I'm fucking.
Maybe she has a live stream that like that's how she makes her money. I don't know.
Well, she obviously doesn't, because if she did, she said that she told one of them that they could watch, and that's why they're even building the tower.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's not really meant to have been thought along for very much. I think it was more of to explain why we, the audience, is also watching this.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way they had to edit this, and I don't want to say edit, but the way they had to animate and like work around this scene to keep that PG-13 rating, there's some very like, ooh, what's the camera doing? Where, ooh, you can't see below here, ooh. But because we had to do that, the audience feels a little awkward watching, because we no longer feel like we're just movie watchers. We now feel a little bit too close and personal.
Yeah, it has that like weird, because it's like when someone brings up that their fetish is 2D girls.
Yeah.
It has that weird, awkward, like, okay, maybe seek some help, dude.
Yeah, like maybe don't say that to people.
Yeah, but in the opposite way of this.
Yes. And like it's gotten to the point where, because the characters in Cool World are hanging out with us, having to be weird and like watch and understand this,
Mm-hmm.
at least we're all awkward and weird with it together. Except for at the very end of the scene when all of everyone else is smoking a cigarette and we're stuck being like, well, that was weird. That was uncomfortable.
Yeah, so my thought on that is I think that's a little bit of a play on it, because, like, why would they be smoking after they did the deed? Well, it's because they're doodles. They're very childlike and
Yeah.
a little innocent in some ways, where it's like they're playing at what they think adults do.
Yeah, and also like there's clearly like cartoon stereotypes and rules that seem to run the world, and the cigarette after being like a hard and true one
Mhm.
makes sense for that to like permeate the whole culture of like, well, that's what everybody does because we're toons.
Yeah.
It's kind of like why all of them are wearing white gloves. I doubt it's just because they're all drawn like that. I think it's just a style fashion choice.
Or are the gloves part of their skin?
We will never know.
Yeah, that you got to think about
We
it.
will never know.
Holly is real now. Which that's
Yeah. Yeah, the magic in this world doesn't make much sense, don't worry.
yeah, but here's the thing is like, how does she even know that would happen? There had to be some point in the doodle lore, in their mythos, someone somewhere before had to come through by banging a doodle. Because that's the thing, we don't have that the way for them to traditionally cross over is through someone like Deebs, who has to draw them, has to be psychically linked somehow. And
also, it's clear that also, like, just doing it is not enough to make you human. Otherwise, a lot more of them would have already been. I mean, yes, we have a policeman. He's clearly not catching everyone, though.
Yeah. Well, also, I do have a thought on this real quick. I am so glad that she's at least a human and not some fucking weird creature or, like, spider.
Yeah, no, I agree. I am a little bummed that we didn't get the horror version of a half-animated, half-real person.
Oh, that would have been so cool, though.
It would have been cool, but also, knowing his style, I think it would have been too acid trippy for Cool World, which is already heavy on the acid trippy.
Yeah.
Which is his style. That is why people like his works, right? Is like, this is what he's most known for, is this, like, it started off a little weird. By the time we get to Holly being a human, it has gotten real weird. Like, stuff has gotten really hard to follow, stuff has gotten really abstract. However, her changing into a normal real human, specifically into Kim, who, the way they managed to get her and the cartoon version of her to line up and look like each other is very impressive. Like,
oh, yeah. I mean,
it's not a 1-for-1, which I like, because it feels like a transformation.
Well, it's also, I like it because it is that reflection that art and cartoons are a reflection, but they're not a one-to-one translation.
Because that's the other thing, is this is specifically Toon's world. There's no, like, realistic portraits, there's no, like, art pieces. It's Toon specific in this world. So her looking like a caricature of herself works super well. And the fact that she voiced her own animated character, then, like, that transition's so smooth. It's so seamless. It's perfectly done.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even though that animation is cool, we get the soft magic shit that just ruins this, because the reason it's bad is because now it means that they can hop between worlds, and somehow this is going to mess with their inner world matrix, and it's like...
Well, I don't understand why or how.
Yeah, what the fuck are we talking about? Frank's been over here for 47 years. How is that not messed with?
Because he's been celibate this whole time.
But, like, what... Okay, being a man...
Yeah.
You have needs.
Yep.
He is a very young man. He has just come back from World War II.
Living like a freaking monk. In Toon World with his Toon girlfriend.
What do you do with wet dreams? Like, what happens like if you get a little bit in the real world? Apparently that doesn't count. Also, like, what if he wore a condom? What about them screwing? Does he have to transfer the genes over? Or
you have to remember that he started in the 40s. So the technology available to him versus later people, I think, is a little different.
Well, no. What I'm talking about is when Deeb screwed Hollywood.
Yes.
If he used a condom, would it not have worked? Or does, like, how does any of that? Yeah.
We don't know. The other thing I have a question on is, I think it's specifically Deeb's, because he is the one that can, like, hop between worlds because he has special animator abilities. So, which does imply that, like, other people show up and they are not special enough. Them and their mojo is not good enough to transport people to other worlds. It's got to be the weird psychopathic animator.
But that also doesn't work too, because that's the whole purpose of Frank being there, is so Hollywood doesn't screw the next thing that walks in.
Because they don't know who's an animator. He's just doing blanket statement nobody.
But neither is Frank, but they're still not doing it. He's not a special animator.
No, but again, he's celibate monk over here. He's living his best holy life.
I don't know.
Man's virtuous, I guess. I don't know. He's about to ascend to godhood.
Yeah. But also my other thing is, it took us 50 minutes to set up the whole, or give us a reason why it was bad for them to screw in the first place. Like,
yeah, and I won't lie, this is a stupider reason than having weird half-breed children. Because at least that one, granted, I see why the studio said no. I see why production said no. But that one makes a much more sense than, like, sometimes certain special crazy people with special talents can sometimes send tunes to the... Like, it's not enough of a hard line Where at least with the sometimes you might have a weird half-breed child, that makes more sense.
Well, okay, we'll get into that in just a minute, because there are things that happen that are the repercussions of this that I still don't get as well.
No, you never will.
Yeah. Because now it's back to the real world.
Yeah.
Which I don't get why we even have Deeb's neighbors in this movie at all. Because this is the second scene they're in, and they're just walking in all nosy like.
Yeah,
and
no idea.
I think it's just a scene to have them back and have Hollywood still be weird in the real world. Because all she wants to do is bang Deebs again in the real world, because now she can really feel it.
Yeah, I don't know why the neighbors are in this movie in the first place. I'm not gonna lie.
I do like, in this scene, though, in the window behind them, there is a tower that says Vegas World.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is good.
Yeah, it's a nice little touch. But also, Cool World is dealing with the aftermath, which...
yeah, I don't understand this.
That's the one thing they bring up, is that, like, they meant, like, maybe they can't use real-world items, and it's just,
but
like...
the car is there.
Yeah, that's...
I don't know. I don't understand. I can vaguely understand pens and writing utensils. I was okay with, like, real-world stuff sometimes getting left in Toon World if it, like, got brought with someone. Mm-hmm. But now it just, like, the rule doesn't apply anymore, and I never could figure out why. It doesn't seem consistent in any way. Yeah.
No, exactly. But, like, it's so fast-paced from the rest of this movie, because the real world, Holly is moving at a toon pace, which, not understanding how the real world moves, and I mean, Deebs is trying to help her, but at the same time, like, I don't get why Deebs is still sticking around, because she's not a toon anymore, so why is he still in love? Or it's the idea of the character, he fell in love with the personality.
Yeah.
That's actually an interesting reversal of general stereotypes of a woman falling for the personality, whereas Holly is falling for whatever is slinging the best dick to her.
Well, and it could have been a much more interesting and like reinterpretation of like the character is the thing that is the creation that like it doesn't really matter who it is. It's just anything that fits that visual style. So for her, it's 3D. Whereas he has fallen in love with specifically this character who happens to be 2D. And now that she's 3D, his perfect waifu is here. But like we don't spend any real time because again, we're like 50-something minutes into this movie now. Well over halfway. And like we're just now exploring this at the fastest breakneck pace possible.
Yeah, because like this is also where we get Frank and Lynette fighting because she doesn't get why he has to go back, and it's like this is the whole bit of like Frank's been living in fear but we don't have any build up to it. He just faces reality in a quick second where he's like, yep, been here 47 years, time to head back to save the world.
Yeah, and this is where, for me, the weakest part of this movie is. A lot of the rest I can get over because of how cool the animation style is or how interesting some of the background characters or stuff is. This scene, like, we are missing so much build up between his relationship and his girlfriends and his, like, love of the world, because he clearly loves it, otherwise he'd want to go back. It's not just, like, this safe haven for him to hide from his, like, terrible memories and his dead mom. But at the same time, he does get back to the real world to do a job, because he's a hardened noir crime-busting police guy, kind of. And yet, he gets there, and he cares nothing about the fact that he's been gone for 47 years. Well, and the desert now has a giant mall in it.
Like you said, he is a hardened detective. He doesn't have time to worry about the world around him. He has to focus on getting these doodles back to Cool World.
I have watched many a crime noir, and I've read many a crime noir with a hardened investigator or private eye or cop. And I think even those guys would have been like, wow, I don't remember that entire city being over there when I was last here. On to the chase. Like, he doesn't blink. Yeah. He doesn't acknowledge anything.
Well, I get where you're going from that, because on top of that, it's been 47 years. He doesn't have a sense of direction. Granted, who knows how long he was over in World War II.
Yeah, he as far as we know, he was over. He came home, killed his mom, went to Toon World.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, there's no build up or any reason for him to fear going back as far as we know, other than dead mom.
Yeah, which, like, is, I think, a valid reason, and why I would have preferred, like, more time for him to be like, well, I was here because I was hiding, but now I've really come to love it.
Yeah, actually.
Which would have been cool, but then he goes back to the world, and not only is he not baffled by anything, he knows how to do everything. In almost 50 years, you're telling me that the car is close enough to the same that he still can do it? No. Things have changed too much. I don't think he would have been able to operate as quickly. I think he would have had to sit there and be like, okay, now what button turns it on?
Yeah.
How do you make a call?
Well, granted, it's the 90s, so still key. Still,
I drive a very old car and a more modern car. And I guarantee you that going from one to the other, this man would have crashed at least twice.
He stole an older car. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, one without power braking or power steering, I'm sure.
Yeah. But we also get to see the ripple effect of the deed being done, where Holly and Jack are changing between personality and personas, where in this world, she doesn't turn back to, like, her beautiful self. She's a clown.
Yeah.
But also, like, we just go so fast pace of, there's a spike of power that was mentioned in the beginning that's now focusing on the doodle, and like
they don't ever explain what that's like, going on.
This it's mentioned that it's the thing that holds their realities from slipping in between each other for some stupid reason.
Which, sure, but like explain that throughout the rest of the movie. We got a brief mention of the spike at the very beginning, and now it's finally back. We're almost done with the film.
Yeah, whereas now, okay, their crossing over could destroy the universe, and the professor's back for some reason. I mean,
I did not need to see him ever again.
And this is like the whole point of, like, it's a permanent reality is the new goal, is, but like that's what Holly wants, is to be permanently real. But at the same time, like, she gets so obsessed with this that, like, she eventually betrays Frank, kills him,
of course,
and there's this really rough passing of the torch to Deebs to take on it takes a creative to fix the problem, which this is the whole thing that doesn't make sense too. There's so many stupid lines with, he's fulfilling his destiny as becoming a hero. Like, what the fuck are you guys talking about?
Yeah. There are so many little trails and threads left throughout this whole movie that could have been wrapped up, I think, with better collaboration on the writing. Because I understand that this is not the original direction that he was hoping for. However, leaving all of these loose bits that I know he knows were not finished, and he left because he was bitter. And I get it. I totally understand. And he's talked about how, like, he was wrong when he was directing this. He should have been more mature with it. He regrets a little bit later on. Like, he talks about that in multiple interviews, right? However, that is why, despite Cool World being one of most people's introductions to his work, it is the weakest, because there's too much that's unanswered. Yeah,
well, it also doesn't make sense, because when she does get the spike, the ghost doodles start now flowing into the real world, kind of like Ghostbusters.
But only the demon ones.
No, and people start getting changed, but it's like, it's not even an issue for Cool World. It's just like...
It's just a problem for real world? Why does Cool World care?
Yeah, and even then, like, Holly's like, I like it here. It's just Cool World 2.0. You're still going to be a toon. You're not going to be able to really feel anything again. Like, what are we doing here?
No. And also, it's implied that, like, this was the only 3D world. So, like, now, if you want to change it, you're screwed. You can't do it anymore.
Yeah, which also, like, when they do eventually save the world and plug the fountain, I mean, it takes 10 minutes for them to do any of this shit.
Yeah, but also those 10 minutes are filled with mostly acid trap scenes.
Yeah, but it also, this is where the soft magic really pissed me off, is Frank is reborn as a doodle, because for some reason now, when a real person is killed by a doodle, they become a doodle. It's like, if you wanted to be here in this real world and screw Lynette, why didn't you do this in the first place? Like, it seems like how crazy that world is. You could have easily found a way to off yourself.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and it reminds me of Pokemon, where everything resets. No one learns a goddamn thing from this. And just they're all fully toons, because Deebs is all. Oh yeah, we forgot to mention that Deebs gets transformed into a toon as well, and
hooray!
Yeah, Holly's still the same. That's it. Everyone is exactly the same.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been even just slightly better if Deebs and or Holly stayed dead.
Yeah, give some consequence to this, because, like, the only thing that we maybe had a little bit of consequence was the pen, when she sucked up Nails with it and gave him the pen job.
But, like...
Nails is back. He's fine.
He's fine.
Yeah.
No, and this is upsetting because Bakshi is famous for doing adult content. And this would have been the perfect place for him to have squeezed in that more adult content and setting into a cartoon world where he was forced to bring the rating down, where he was forced to take out a lot of those adult and, like, bigger thoughts, right? This would have been easy because it would not have changed the rating. Children would not have cared if the bad guy died. And, like, Nine's, the Nails is dead, but, like, who really cares?
No, Nails isn't dead. He's back.
I know he's back, but, like, if he had stayed dead, I don't think a single person would have cared.
No.
Because he's barely in this movie, and he's annoying.
Exactly. It just, I get so pissed at the end of this, like, we're watching it, like, it makes no sense. And I think that's part of the failures, because despite the various random things happening, which, honestly, some of the animation of, like, everything just bouncing in front of the screen becomes obnoxiously disgusting at times.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Everything just happens for the sake of the plot just to happen, and it's... I mean, that's the other thing, too, is, like, they mentioned that part of the failure wasn't necessarily that, hey, this kind of stuff happened, or nothing really became of it, is the trailer was good, but the studio softened the marketing and support because of a regime change.
Yeah, they did.
But it's just, like, it's even if that's the case of why the Cool World didn't do so well...
That's what they say, but...
It's not that good of a movie towards the end. Like, there's they also said that, or producer Frank Mancuso Jr. said that felt like it was made more for animators and not an audience, and that's what it feels like at times. It's just like a flexing of skills of, oh, cool, look what we've done. We blended real IRL and animated.
I can totally see that, and yeah, you're not the only one with this complaint. A bunch of critics, when this movie came out, were not fans of the writing, were not fans of the ending. They had complaints throughout, not just, like, with, like, the storytelling, but with animation in general. It really wasn't until this hit home theaters that this became a cult classic in any way. Granted, it hit cult classic status very quickly, and now sits very firmly in, like, most people's, like, repertoire, at least to some extent. I mean, by no means is this movie the cheapest one that we've ever bought.
Yeah, I know a lot of his work for a while faded into obscurity, but it got brought up. I know Peter Jackson was a fan of his stuff.
The
guy who did Ren and Stimpy
was also a big fan. Granted, most people really only know this, Fritz, and to some extent the Lord of the Rings, so that one for a long time was just like a hardcore nerd person type of thing. And now, because Lord of the Rings is so big, it's kind of like re-emerged, but not in the same way. It's not like a fan for that sake. It's like a, wow, look at this kind of shitty version of Lord of the Rings. And most people now truly only know him and his work through Cool World, and then to some extent Fritz the Cat. And this is usually most people's introduction. Then they hear, oh, there's a more adult one. It's always Fritz. And that's kind of the extent where most people end, which is disappointing because his other works are honestly much more interesting.
And see, that's the thing is I knew all of those, like, I learned of all of those separately, not making the connection that they
were all the same guy.
Yeah, that they were all the same director. So it's like, I knew of Fritz the Cat, but I knew of Fritz the Cat from the comic strips. I'd seen a couple. But I didn't know that the movie was Bakshi. I knew of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that one's special.
Yeah, and I knew of Cool World. So, like, they were all, like, separate little things. And then Fire and Ice, I thought, was something because of its ties to someone else.
Sure, and Wizards and all that. But
yeah.
And, like, once you start to recognize him and his, like, the art style that he typically goes for, with, again, the exception of Lord of the Rings, who's a special little child in the corner eating glue, you can start to see it. And, like, that's where... For people who are a huge fan of him, that's their bread and butter is like, oh, look at his whole collection. Like, watching them in order for a lot of people is really enjoyable because there is a progression in style and storytelling until you get to Cool World, which kind of makes sense. Again, there was a lot of trouble in creating this that ended up with a subpar product. But with that said, this is most people's big introduction to him.
Yeah.
Which I don't quite understand how that is.
Because it's the most accessible of them. Because it's the more fun one, and it doesn't have the heavy-handed political commentary, as well as arguably from what I've seen of his earlier stuff, some of the visuals are offensive.
Yes.
Specifically Coonskin, which...
Yes, Coonskin really has some spots.
But is a fantastic movie. That's the thing, is like, once, like, I precautious to try watching that one. I'm like, I don't know if I should be watching this one. And then I started getting into it. Like, this is actually a really good commentary on these stereotypes. And of course, it has to be the stereotype to portray it. Yeah, that's true. And a lot of people in the Cool World fandoms that I could read comments on of people who have, like, still talking about this movie, the thing that made it for them was Holly. Mm-hmm. She was huge in the marketing. Like I said, they put a gigantic version of her on the Hollywood sign. Ha ha, how hilarious. Like, she was on all of the movie posters. The few somewhat accurate, like, trailers that they put out were almost exclusively of Holly doing mostly the dance scene at the very beginning, and then a little bit of, like, the running and chasing with the humans. People watched this movie for her. And I think it went past just the, oh, she's a pretty character, because she has that, like, arc growth. She has interesting characters and morality and goals. She does have interesting bits. She's just not as fleshed out as we know she could have been. Well, she doesn't even really have a growth but that's the thing that makes her interesting, is because she doesn't have that. None of the characters really have any growth whatsoever, other than maybe Frank a little bit. I would argue Frank eventually, like, settles in. Frank doesn't have, like, a growth. He just kind of comes to term with it and, like, okay, I mean, he's definitely not curing his emotional trauma. He is legitimately just quote unquote facing reality. Yes. Yeah. Which, I mean, for this movie is pretty spot on. But I can understand why people like this movie. I still enjoy this movie. I enjoy it for the weird and fun visuals. I enjoy it for Holly's character. I enjoy it for, you know, occasionally looking at a young Brad Pitt and, like, laughing at how far he's come and what a different person he is now. However, the reason I wanted to pick this one is because it is such an outlier, and yet such a good, like, capping stone of all of what Bakshi does. Mm-hmm. It has all of the little hints, and yet, it is such an outlier in his works. So then, Chris, what do you rate Cool World? This is gonna hurt for me to say. Okay. But I am just giving this a bad weird. I don't think there's enough good to justify it getting any good. Okay. It has plenty of bad. There's a lot that it could have done better, either with a bigger budget, more time, or with less fighting inside the scenes. Apparently, just him wasn't also the only problem. There was a lot of trouble getting actors to cooperate with each other. There was a lot of trouble getting animators to cooperate with each other. The only person who seemed to not have any problems was the music department. It's good for them. Yeah, because Bowie was super into working on this. Yes, he was. Yeah, and also, at least doing a song for it. And also, most of the music wasn't recorded specifically for this. I think his is the only one. Everything else was sitting in a vault somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, it has enough bad, but it's not a bad movie on its own. It has plenty of fun weird, which highlights his work for me, is what makes this movie special. Yeah, I am going to give it the trifecta. The trifecta? Good, bad, weird. Oh my god. One, I do think the idea is cool. I do like that it's a darker Who Framed Roger Rabbit, an attempt. It is, yeah. There are some interesting visuals in the background. I do think that it does try pushing some of the limits. It made a more accessible version of some of Bakshi's other works, but it didn't push it in the way that I would want it to. And part of the issue with that is studio involvement. 100%. And the story becomes an absolute utter mess. Even if you threw away some of the soft magic stuff and just accept it as it is, the plot itself goes absolutely nowhere, and not in like a not even like a Pan's Labyrinth or a Coen Brothers movie where it's what you pull from it. It's not necessarily about how it ends. Yeah, it just ends. And there's no denying this is a weird ass movie too. So it is. Oh, it is. It hits that weird button in a very like approachable way. Yeah, it 100% hits that whole trifecta for me. There's so much to it that I like. There's so much I dislike. Yeah, and it's just weird all over around. So I totally can see it. But would you recommend Cool World? Kinda. Okay. Cool. To me, Cool World is the testing grounds to see if you like Bakshi and his works, because he has better ones. Mm-hmm. If you like a statement movie, if you like something that has a strong commentary, but you need to have the stomach for it. He has a very distinct style. He's not afraid to show the more offensive stuff
to help make fun of certain aspects.
Yep.
If you like Cool World and you're interested in more, this for me is the testing ground to see if you're ready for the other stuff. However, by itself as like a, hey, you should watch Cool World, not really.
Yeah, I think I'm very selective on who I would recommend this to. For film lovers and animation lovers, 100%. If you haven't seen Bakshi, like you said, this is a good introduction to his work. It's relatively accessible. It doesn't go too heavy into the commentary, unless you dig a little bit like we do, and it brings up more questions than it answers. But it's not something I'm going to be like, because I'm introducing my mother to animated movies.
I would maybe skip this one for your mom.
No, 100%. But like, it's definitely not something I would recommend, like, just to sit down and have a fun watch-sees with people on like a Saturday.
I totally agree. However, as someone who I'm interested in collecting his works, will I be adding this to my list? 100%.
Oh yeah, it's very, very good to just.
It rounds out.
Yeah, anyone interested in animation.
It's the opposite of his Lord of the Rings work.
Yeah. Which we are not doing Lord of the Rings next.
No, we are not. We've already talked about that movie as much as humanly possible.
Not Bakshi's, but well, we'll do it at some point. We're just still a little burnt out from
that was
3
so
years
much
ago.
So much research.
Yeah. But it's a new season and a new game. Chris and I are playing bingo, and you can too. Rules for players are simple. 1 stamp per card per episode. Cards can be found on our socials at TGTBTW Podcast on Instagram and Threads, and TGTBTW Podcast on Twitter. Or feel free to email us your requests at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. You can use any of the 3 bingo card variations, but each stamp must be associated with a Season 6 episode, whether that be Mainline, Microview, or Spotlight. First place has already been taken. Second place gets to choose a deep dive and a microview. Third place gets to choose 2 microviews. Fourth and fifth place get to choose a microview apiece. So feel free to share with us on social media or email us to participate. Rules are slightly different for Chris and myself. We only get a total of 2 stamps per deep dive. First to get a bingo in any of the categories gets of the good, bad, and weird cards, gets to choose a movie that they feel fit that category for Season 7. I've already won good for next year, so what do you got going, Chris?
I would like to announce that I have won the bad card with yet another tragic backstory.
Oh, geez.
That sad dead mother did me proud today.
All right. Well.
And then for my second stamp on my weird card, I will be going with romance because reasons. Because I don't feel like him and his toon girlfriend really had a connection.
Yeah, we might be kicking the year off with the end of bingo, because I'm not even going to work on bad. I'm going to do... Nicho comes up with an absurd theory for something that doesn't matter.
I'm going to give it to you, because you honestly managed to make this movie make a little more sense for me. Congratulations.
You're welcome. So one weird, that's all the bingo cards. Kicking off the year with... Well,
with a bang.
We're done with Season 6 game, I guess.
I guess we did it. Congratulations.
I'll also read off the rules at the end for anyone to choose, so...
We can continue, if you'd like, with the secondary rules of bingo. I know you don't peruse the bars like I do on bingo night on a Friday. However, usually what happens is after you have bingoed, you may continue to play a card that you've won that thing in. The next thing you go for is the opposite X.
We'll figure out if there's stakes, or we'll play it for posterity's sake.
We can play it for posterity, because honestly, there's been a few I've been eyeing. Specifically that Wilhelm scream section. I know where it's gonna happen. I've been waiting for it.
Well, in the favor of that, in the bad category, I'm going to do rant about Marvel and Disney.
I will accept it, because honestly, who else could possibly be more upset than this man at Disney, other than maybe Don Bluth?
Yeah. Honestly, Cool World was something I never thought we'd cover when we started this podcast, but just you wait, dear listeners. We are still on a bit of an animated kick to kick off the year with a new next episode and mic review, so get ready for some more adult animation with something that has a little bit more heat and some might say are cooler than Cool World.
Oh my gosh, what could it be?
But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.
thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace!